There are mountains that may look like a scene from The Wizard of Oz or a level in Mario Kart, but are actually very much of our world. Welcome to Zhangye Danxia National Geopark in northwest China. Here, striking rainbow-striped mountains jut out of a harsh landscape. But there's more to these landforms than meets the eye. These mesmerizing stripes are also an incredibly detailed record of life in China long before humans walked the earth. So they've attracted the attention of not only tourists, but geologists, who are figuring out how they formed and what they can tell us about what this part of the earth was like over 100 million years ago. Now, these mountains have layers, and layers are pretty standard fare in geology, and so pretty easy to understand. These are sedimentary rocks, meaning many little bits like sand accumulate, stick together, and form rock. At first, geologists assumed that these layers formed in the bottom of a river or lake, which is pretty typical. But when they looked closer, they noticed some odd details in the multicolored rocks. Sedimentary layers often have sharp boundaries between them, but these transition into one another gradually. And there are small structures in the layers that almost look like branching roots. Probably because they are. Turns out these layers are actually paleosols, which basically means fossilized soil. It happens when dirt, like you have in your garden, gets buried under more sediment. Over time, the soil turns into rock. But it keeps many of the characteristic features of soil that geologists can use to identify it millions of years later. Things like root traces or soil horizons, where the properties of soil change gradually as you dig deeper below the surface. Zhangye Danxia is made of 755 meters of paleosol layers. There's some uncertainty around the age of these layers, but the oldest is likely around 120 million years old, with the rest of the layers taking around 10 million years to build up on top of it. Now, researchers have been able to sort these paleosols into 14 different types, and that provides us with some insights into the development of their brilliant colors. The rainbow colors are caused by different forms of iron minerals, present in different amounts in each type of layer. Red comes from the mineral hematite, which is made of iron oxide without much water. Brown and yellow come from goethite, another iron oxide mineral, but with a bit more water in it. Yellow can also come from jarosite, which forms when there is more sulfur around. And the gray layers form when there's more carbon from organic material. These minerals can also tell us something about the environment that formed each soil layer. But more on that in a moment after a message from our sponsor. Thanks to Brilliant for supporting this SciShow video. Brilliant is an online learning platform that respects your time and energy. They get that you have other things going on in your life, so they offer lessons that you can complete in a matter of minutes whenever you have the time. And those lessons are designed for you to actually remember what you learned from one day to the next. That way you don't waste your time memorizing stuff that you'll forget by the end of the day and have to repeat lessons. You can find Brilliant at brilliant.org/scishow, the QR code, or the link in the description. That link will also give you 20% off an annual premium Brilliant subscription, and you'll get the first 30 days for free. To make the Zhangye Danxia Mountains, these layers needed to go from buried deep underground to sticking up into the sky where they are now. 50 million years ago, India slammed into the rest of Asia to build the Himalayas. The effects of that collision rippled over 1,000 kilometers to the north, all the way to Zhangye Danxia. However, the story of these mountains really begins sometime between 120 and 145 million years ago, in the early Cretaceous, before any of these soil layers even formed. Tectonic forces first pulled the continental crust apart, forming a series of faults and basins between them. The soil layers built up in one of these basins, got buried under more sediment, and over time turned into rock. Then, partly because of the collision of India, those big tectonic forces did a U-turn. Instead of pulling the continent apart, they pushed it together. That means all those faults that slid one way switched direction. This pushed that basin, now full of paleosols, up into the sky and tilted it over. The sedimentary rock above quickly eroded away to reveal the dramatic layers we see today. And geologists owe these tectonic forces a big favor. Not only did they create a beautiful landscape, all those layers are perfectly preserved and exposed for scientists to study without digging them up. Which, for one thing, would be a lot of hard work, but also, as one team of researchers remarked, is is lucky because the geopark is a protected site and they're not allowed to dig there. Paleosol layers tell the story of how wet and humid things were when they first formed. They're influenced by how much rain fell from the sky and how much water stuck around in the soil. The amount of water in soil affects which iron oxide minerals are able to form. Hematite forms in dry conditions and goethite forms when it's wet. So the ratio of these two minerals can tell scientists how waterlogged the ground was. Researchers identified that the oldest period was very humid, with cycles of the soil being especially waterlogged every 100,000 years. After that, there was a long dry spell with only a few sporadic periods of humidity. And finally, things shifted to a long wet period. This helps paint a picture of the conditions in Cretaceous China. We already knew this was a toasty time on Earth. Greenhouse gases in the atmosphere were high, as much as 3 times higher than they are today. And with all the carbon dioxide us humans are pumping into the atmosphere, we could reach levels comparable to the Cretaceous by the end of this century. That means the information in the paleosols at Zhangye Danxia is valuable. It can tell us how our planet might respond to a similar increase in greenhouse gases now. Today, in Asia, similar soil types can only be found a long way to the south. That means at the time, it was warmer and wetter further north. So these mountains were once dirt, part of a very different ecosystem than we see in the area today. Then tectonic forces took them on a ride lasting tens of millions of years. They were buried, turned to stone, thrust back up into the air, tilted over, and finally uncovered. And thanks to that wild ride, we now have both a beautiful tourist attraction and a snapshot into what 10 million years of a much hotter China looked like. And times like this in Earth's history give researchers a window into how water cycles and ecosystems could change in our warming world.